Yeah.
Okay. Special welcome to our first time Oasis today. Good to have you here. And just, this is a different model than a church in that I don't speak every week. We have lots of guest speakers. We want to hear from a variety of voices. We believe our experience, our understanding of the world is enriched by a variety. So this isn't the talking head. You just so happen to come here on a day when I'm talking, okay? So if you don't like it, come back. So it won't be me every week. So here it goes. A few weeks ago, I heard a story on This American Life, you know, the NPR radio show, and Alex Bloomberg, who was a producer of the show, did a segment on a topic I had not really thought about before, which was the misconceptions that we sometimes pick up in childhood and then carry with us into adulthood unknowingly. And he started with one of his own. This is the producer of This American Life on NPR. He said that back when he was 11 or 12, he had heard that television networks consulted Nielsen families to learn about, television ratings. And, he had at an early age, he had kind of a rudimentary understanding of how you take a segment of the population and extrapolate and that kind of stuff, but he guessed that they chose the name Nielsen because it had been a fairly common name, one that cut across economic lines. It may have been close to a representative sample of the American population, and he never really thought about it after that. And 20 years later, he was talking to a friend who had just been selected to be a Nielsen family, and Bloomberg remarked to his friend, "Isn't it weird they're all named Nielsen?" Awkward silence. He said he was 34 when he had that conversation. Okay, so based on that, he did some research and went asking people and found out some amazing stuff. A very common one is the word misled, because there are a lot of words that we read, but then we only hear them in our head. We've never heard them. And apparently, a lot of people early on think the word misled is pronounced misled, and they assume that it's the archaic past tense of a verb no longer used, misel, which means to deceive. There was a woman, I'll link this one, there was a woman who, when she was a kid, saw the school crossing sign, the silhouette of the school with the Xing deal, and she thought that was a word pronounced zing. And there were zings all over the place. There were train zings and pedestrian zings. And she said that in her early 20s, she was walking to work one day, I think she lived in Boston, with a colleague, and something like 10 geese just walked across the path there. And she remarked to her friend, "Wow, there's so many geese here, they need their own zing sign." Awkward silence. Which is how these things usually happen. Anyway, you can find this stuff, you can listen to the whole story online on the archive. There is another guy who said that it wasn't until he was in his 30s, until his 30s, he thought that the word quesadilla was Spanish for "what's the deal?" I kind of like that one, actually. I think I'm going to start using it, Quesadilla, man, So, the thing that fascinated me most about this story is that these are some really smart people with just a small misperception in their verbal repertoire. And it got me thinking the same question that Alex Bloomberg was thinking: what else have I missed? What am I missing all the time? These were smart people. We're all prone to that kind of stuff. So the human brain is this utterly marvelous thing, and it's also one of the last frontiers of science that we're still barely beginning to understand. But evolution has also wired into our brains shortcuts and algorithms that tens or hundreds of thousands of years ago aided the survival of our species, but it can kind of trip us up today. And our brains often play tricks on us. And none of us are exempt, no matter how rational we try to be. Here's just a few. Confirmation bias, you've heard of that. We see the things that we want to see. Fundamental attribution error, the tendency to place undue emphasis on internal characteristics to explain someone's behavior rather than considering external circumstances. that moron didn't use his turn signal because he's a moron, rather than he doesn't know that his turn signal's broken, or something like, we do that all the time. This is one of my favorites, is priming. How we are subliminally, impacted by our surroundings, even in decision-making processes. One of the most famous studies on this was conducted at a wine shop, where they found out if you play French music, people are more prone to buy French wine. If you play German music, more prone to buy German wine. Italian music, Italian wine. This is a real deal. I experienced priming the other day. It kind of caught me by surprise. It was just a little thing, but I'm like totally obsessed with the New York Times crossword puzzle. It's the first thing I do when I wake up in the morning. And I noticed the other day that I was filling out the puzzle differently than I normally filled it out. Like, it was making my letters smaller. And I usually write big letters and fill in the whole square. So I'm like, why was I doing that? And I realized that I had run out of my favorite pack of crossword doing pencils, and I had found some short study pencils. And just using a shorter pencil, I made smaller letters. And that's priming. Okay, so that's just the tip of the iceberg. There are dozens of more brain misfirings like that, which we are prone to every day. I actually kind of wanted to call this talk brain farts, but I didn't think that would be a good, for public relations and all that stuff. Our tagline at Houston Oasis is a compassionate community grounded in reason, celebrating the human experience. But it's probably more accurate to say we're trying to be grounded in reason, because that's the best our species can do. And if you think you can do better than try, you're fooling yourself. We're all on a learning curve, individually and collectively. Think of all the pieces of conventional wisdom that we mostly just accepted once upon a time, which we now know are not true. When you were a kid, you couldn't go swimming 30 minutes after eating because what? You would get cramps and drown. The cramps are the important part. It was always cramps and drowning together, and that doesn't. Stretching before exercise does nothing to prevent injury or make injuries less severe or anything like that. Stretching, there's nothing wrong with stretching. It doesn't do anything for you. Everybody used to think that stomach ulcers were caused by stress, until some brilliant researcher found out they're mostly caused by bacteria, and they're now treated with antibiotics. So again, it makes me wonder, what else are we missing? How much of the current conventional wisdom is off base? I bet there's a lot. I saw something that scared me the other day. I was driving around on my side of town, northwest side, and drove by a church. It's a growing, popular, edgy, evangelical church. And and the architecture exudes this kind of postmodern edginess, reflects the vibe they're trying to create there. And in big letters across the top of the entrance to one of the buildings, in an edgy postmodern font, were the words, and the letters were about as tall as me, one word, truth. Truth. And the message is very clear. Come inside these doors and you will find truth, because we have the truth with a capital T, and we're glad to share it with you. And I thought, that's a bit audacious, because the older I get, the less I know. I just really feel that. And I realize, how little I know. I have so much to learn. And because I've been learning about how our brains work, I'm less certain than ever about any claim to truth. And I think that's a contribution that secular communities in America are going to be able to make to the human conversation. We can show the value of humility about what we claim to know. It's like that old joke. Did you hear about the Unitarian Ku Klux Klan members? They come to your house and burn a question mark on your lawn. I hope that wasn't in bad taste. Seriously, there's nothing wrong with question marks. And I think we could use a few more question marks. Seems like our world could benefit from question marks, from more people who aren't so confident of the truth with a capital T. It turns out that most people in our society hold some pretty strong opinions about a lot of topics they know almost nothing about. Climate change, cap and trade, the economic stimulus plan, healthcare reform, you name it. I know, when I read that, I thought, yeah, I have very strong opinions about stuff I know almost nothing about. I get a kick out of the polling. That, when they poll on individual aspects of the Affordable Care Act, no limits on pre-existing conditions, no limits on lifetime care, free mammograms, overwhelmingly popular item by item. But when you ask people about Obamacare, they hate it. It's the same thing, A few weeks ago, Ken Ismert and I did a presentation on the book Moral Tribes, and the author of that book had a good suggestion for dealing with this kind of thing in a constructive way. Here's the approach that he suggests. The next time your opinionated drunk uncle at the Thanksgiving dinner starts ranting about a topic like, how healthcare reform is destroying the nation or whatever, climate change is bunk or whatever, don't confront him or challenge him directly or start an argument. Don't try to present counterbalancing evidence, because that doesn't work. What they're suggesting is to just ask questions and say, well, that's interesting. How exactly does national health insurance work? And some good research has shown that people will actually start to moderate their positions when they're put in a position where they have to try to explain them. I thought, that's brilliant. Because we always think, present the evidence and people will believe. No. Invite them into a conversation and make them think. I like that a lot. What a great strategy. And it can make a real difference in diffusing some tense conversations by being less confrontational and adopting more question marks.
What if you ask them, how does it work? They just start coming up with nonsense that they've heard from Rush Limbaugh or something.
Oh, yeah.
These death panels, and then they take you to this room and they start doing it.
Don't wreck my talk, Bradley. What I'm thinking is, what I would do, me personally, my approach, but I would try to do even more questions. Take the Socratic approach. The Socratic approach can become kind of annoying, but that's a good question. Discuss about that at lunch amongst yourselves. Good. That's good. So I think the same goes for how we interact with religious believers. The free thought blogosphere is at times known for having a certain amount of snarkiness and condescension and hostility towards believers. How can they fall for all that stuff? And I got a couple thoughts on that. Remember, in the grand scheme of things, for many people in this room, if not most, it wasn't that long ago. Shirley shared that she had been, believed as years as an adult, and we were there too. And once I realized how none of it added up, and the claims of religion are based on nothing, I kicked myself for being a slow learner. And I now know that that's pointless, because our individual learning curves are so unique. It could not have been any other way. And so just take it for what it is, and our life situations are unique, and people who believe are not dumb. Some of the smartest people I know are religious. How are we doing? We got a lot of time, okay. As I look back on my life now, and I think about, the journey to free thought was a very, very long journey, and seeds were being planted that, how stuff gets in your brain and just kind of lays dormant there, but it's like a really kind of, back when I was in college, we had a family friend here, and he was a friend with his kids, and he was a he was a head of R&D for a major oil company. So some of you here might even know him. I'm not going to say the name of it, he's deceased now. But, he knew about my interest in kind of science and theology, and he was interested in science and theology. He was a real scientist, and we would sit and talk. He gave me Carl Sagan's The Dragons of Eden, kind of the first book of that type that I had ever read. And I loved the book. I didn't connect the dots at the time. But sometimes it just takes a while. Like I said, I'm a slow learner. And so I think we would kind of want to remember that. And there are rational reasons to believe. Now, don't take that out of context. I'm going to explain. It is not rational to believe that Jesus walked on water, or rose from the dead, or Joseph Smith translated golden tablets, or Prophet Muhammad got sucked up into heaven. That is not rational. But from an evolutionary perspective, it is rational to accept the myths that provide meaning and coherence to your tribe. Out of self-interest, we all need a tribe, we're a tribal species. We have been hardwired by evolution to accept the wisdom of our parents and our elders at an early age, fairly unquestioningly, because once upon a time, accepting that wisdom kind of helped us to live. And so there are, from an evolutionary perspective, there are rational reasons for belief. Does that make sense? Okay, so maybe I'm a simpleton, but I think we could effectively promote the cause of free thought and reason simply by being much nicer about it. I really think that's the best approach. Back when I was in middle school, and we were going to confirmation class, I had to memorize all of Luther's small catechism, which is mostly a horrible waste of time. But there was one phrase from the catechism that kind of stuck with me over the years, because I think it resonated, it made sense. And he was explaining the 8th commandment, which is you shall not bear false witness, and he explained it this way. He says, it means we're not to betray, slander, or lie about our neighbor, but defend them, speak well of them, and explain their actions in the kindest way. And now that is wisdom. It's not, there are no metaphysical claims, there's no superstition or magic or angels or anything like that in that statement that came from a religious person, but it's wisdom based on life, based on the recognition that we all are frail, we are all myopic, we all have blank spots in our field of vision, and it's just and adopting the stance of humility and charity in dealing with, that's good advice for any human being, believer or non-believer. The book, A Beautiful Mind, is the biography of the Nobel laureate John Nash, the great mathematician. You probably saw the movie, wonderful movie. And, he was this amazingly gifted man who also struggled with serious brain disorders. And during one of his periods of being institutionalized, Nash was visited by another famous mathematician who asked him, while he was visiting him at the hospital, psych hospital, how could you, a mathematician, a man devoted to reason and logical truth, believe that extraterrestrials are sending you messages? How can you believe that you are being recruited by aliens from outer space to save the world? And Nash's response was, because the ideas I had about supernatural beings came to me the same way that my mathematical ideas did. So I took them seriously. Granted, Nash's case is extreme. Probably nobody in this room has either his level of genius or his level of brain disorder. But I think the story makes a good point, because sometimes our brains function great, a lot of times they don't. And most of the time we're not even aware that we're buying French wine and writing tiny little letters in the crossword puzzle. And at some level, we are all on the same continuum as John Nash. And that's the good news, because at least we're not alone. We're all in the same boat, we're all stumbling in the dark, but if we're honest about it and we stumble together, we might do it a little more effectively. That's what I got for you today. So